Hello and welcome everyone. I am Kathy Grice, Senior Program Director and lead staff supporting the TC 2.0 ad hoc. Thank you so very much for your interest and attending today's webinar on the proposed TAB Technical Community Process Improvements. This webinar is being recorded for on-demand access. We welcome your questions and comments. It is with great pleasure for me to introduce you to our hosts, Steve Diamond and John Verboncor.
Thank you, Kathy, and thanks to everyone who's joined us for this webinar. We're excited to be able to talk with you about the improved TC process. You may have heard from us previously, but this is an update on where we are today and what we're planning to bring to TAB at the next meeting. Just to summarize why we're proposing this improved TC process, as many of you know, TCs were created to grow emerging and cross-cutting areas like startups. But the present structure and the process itself have flaws, both in the process and in providing limited opportunity for engagement of TAB and SCs, especially managing FOIs. So we're going to show today the proposed TC improvements to fix the flaws, and they include a more formal role for TAB in TC proposal review and approval. We think that's crucial. We want to create a growth-oriented financial model that doesn't penalize the TCs, but stimulates them. And we want to add a continuing mentoring and management process to help the TCs become successful. On the next slide, we've summarized why the TC process that we have today is suboptimal. If you've looked at section 4.8 in the flowchart in section 4.9 of TAB Ops Manual, you'll find that it's confusing and it contains errors, and there's a snapshot of that process in the lower right-hand corner. In particular, the process, since we're building something to facilitate startups, should be architected as a startup, but it isn't. TCs remain a burden on the societies and councils acting as TC venture capitalists. And in particular, the TCs have no ability to carry assets that they create forward. They're annually zeroed out. And when there's time for them to graduate to another phase, they're also zeroed out. So the whole idea of creating startups that build assets that can be used to spin out into new ways is made impossible by this zeroing process. The ad hoc committee on SCs that Fred Schindler chaired highlighted weaknesses in the current process for forming S&Cs and identified TC 2.0 as a viable path. I like to say that the whole that we've created is less than the sum of the parts, just exactly what is the opposite of what we'd want to do if we were designing a process for startups. Next slide. How are we going to improve the process and what are we going to call it? Well, you've probably heard TC 2.0 on and off about this process. That's a working title that the ad hoc is using. We don't propose to use that title going forward. We're going to call it Technical Communities. The changes that we're implementing in the proposed TAB Ops Manual, section 4.8, follows the model from section 4.4, which is the S&C formation process. And we've added a new TAB Ops Manual, section 317, for the Technical Community Review Committee, TCRC, which is another innovation that the ad hoc has come up with. And this follows the model from section 3.14, the S&C Review Committee. I'm going to ask John Verboncor to talk about the new lifecycle process. And John, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Steve. And so as you can see, the new lifecycle process can be laid out in 4 simple steps. First is a proposal phase in which a letter of intent is submitted. And this is really to make it a light process so that we don't have proposers doing a lot of work on something that we ultimately will determine is not part of the field of interest of IEEE, or conflicts with an existing field of interest and therefore doesn't make sense. And so this is a way to make it a relatively light on-ramp. And so the technical community review committee that we're proposing to stand up would then request a business plan if they feel the letter of intent makes sense to move forward. And then it would move to step 2, a review phase. And in this phase, the TCRC would determine whether the TC should proceed. And then TAB would be provided with a review period to comment on the proposed TC. This would be, again, to do the field of interest check to make sure that we don't have a substantial overlap and that others are aware and supportive. And so recalling from Steve's earlier description, this is intended to be a cross-cutting vertical type activity. So there will occasionally be touch points with existing activities, but they shouldn't be predominantly overlapping. And so TMC would review the proposal and determine whether they support formation. In step 3, we go to an operations phase where the TC is managed. And so if TAB approves the new C2C, it moves into this phase. The TCRC would review the health of the TC annually and provide a report to TMC, much as they currently do for societies and councils on a longer time scale. But because TCs are nascent, the direction is to have a single year review cycle to make sure they stay on track and are moving in the right direction. Finally, in step 4, there's a transition phase. TCs have an automatic sunset built in at 5 years. This sunset then triggers a decision point. That doesn't mean they can't continue, but an affirmative decision has to be made for them to continue. That continuation might be as a council or some other implement, even a society, if that's warranted. And again, that would go through the formal process. Recall, as Steve mentioned, in June of 2023, TAB approved TC 2.0 as the nominative future process for society and council formation with this life cycle in mind. And so this was to give us a sunset mechanism. And so a little bit about the Technical Community Review Committee. I'm not going to go through all these details. We wanted to show this to show that it is thought through in great detail. This is quite symmetric with the Society and Council Review Committee. It will consider reports to TAB. It will have no committees to report to it, but in principle, it could form ad hoc committees to address, for example, a change in process or anything like that. It will report to TMC as a non-voting member. It has a number of key functions which are very symmetric with the Society and Council Review Committee, including reviewing and providing guidance, in this case on an annual basis. It will supervise the evolution, make sure that they're on track, and then migrate existing technical communities to the new model. The composition is shown here. You can see a number of appointees, staggered terms, trying to build in different perspectives, both from small and large society perspectives and so on. You can see the terms of office. I won't go through that in detail, but we are trying to stagger it so we maintain sort of rollover of senior and junior, so we have mentoring and so on going on as most good committees do. Finally, meetings will be predominantly electronic unless there's a compelling reason to do otherwise. There is no intended travel budget, and so if there is a need for that, that would have to be a special case. Visited with a number of different bodies in the process of building this over recent years. And so we've shown a number of these here, a number of key engagement points. And so you can see with TAB, we addressed a number of issues. Some of those are actually recent, so we do want to call those out. In particular, the management of prior commitments was called out. So it came to our attention that there are some TC 1.0s that were transitioning to a new body, and there were challenges in ensuring that their existing commitments were fulfilled. And so we made that a formal part of the process so that when a TC does transition, it's still required to fulfill its commitments. In addition to that, we also came to understand that There was concern about field of interest overlap, so we actually built in a formal component of the process, mirroring the process that PERCOM performs with newly forming publications to allow for a period in which TAB can comment on the field of interest and the TC in general. So this gives TAB a lot more say in the process. In terms of governance, we've worked through this with both corporate and TAB governance, and you see the results in the governance materials. We've also worked with finance on this. One point of discussion that stood out with finance was around the term of asset. We won't cover it in this presentation unless you ask for it, but we do have backup material on what we mean by assets. But all of you that come from TAB backgrounds know that we have assets which are more than just products and services. They could be member lists, they could be other things of utility that aren't strictly products and services. So finally, legal and compliance has also gone through this, and we've updated and incorporated all of their comments and concerns. So finally, the timeline. And so you can see that this is just a localized timeline for this year. Obviously, it extends before that. But you can see we're at the 30th of October point right in the center for this webinar. The next steps on this, we've already got an endorsement from TMC. And so the next steps on this are following this webinar, which will also be posted for people to review. In the November meeting series at TAB, we'll bring forth a motion that Steve will describe shortly. And then you can see implementation is targeted at January 2026. There will be additional governance efforts around publications and standards which are not included in the current iteration because they involve more complexity and in particular more formalities throughout IEEE's governance. Back to you, Steve.
Thank you, John. As John mentioned, there will be 2 motions to TAB at the November meeting. Both of these were endorsed by TMC at their last meeting by unanimous consent. And the 2 motions are to approve revisions to the TAB Ops Manual, Section 4.8, which is the section for TAB technical communities. On the next slide, you'll see the typical project alignment to the strategic plan. The second motion is to approve additions to the TAB Ops Manual implementing the Technical Community Review Committee that John described. And again, that's in 3.17 of the Ops Manual. The next slide is the project alignment to the strategic plan. And both of these, as John mentioned, were endorsed by unanimous consent by TMC at their last meeting. This slide and the previous slides will be presented at the TAB meeting in November for approval. I want to now thank the ad hoc committee for their work. You can see the names of the members of the committee. There's been a substantial amount of work on this proposal over time with great contributions by the committee, and I want to make sure to acknowledge them as well as the staff, which is part of the committee that's made this possible. Some of the members have moved on to other roles in IEEE, and they're listed here as previous members. And I want to also acknowledge that we've added Doug Zuckerman, who's the new initiative committee representative on the ad hoc. On the next slide, I've listed some possible discussion topics, and I'll hand it over to Kathy to open the floor for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you, John. Murty, you unmuted.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Kathy, John, and Steve. So this is Murty Palavarpu. I'm the president of the SSIT. I just want to get the discussion started. So you have a question to start with, but this is a minor one. But if you go to slide 5, sorry, that there are different phases listed there. But I'm wondering why the TAB approval is not in the review phase, but in the management phase. But I would expect that after the TMC, the next step would be the TAB approval. And then that is the exit point for the review and the entry point for the operations management it starts in step 3?
Thank you for the question, Murti. I think this is really just the style in which these slides were laid out. We put the gating step for that entry to that phase as the first step. So you'll notice step 2 has TCRC recommends proceed to the review phase as the first step there. So the gating step is that first step. So in step 3, that tab approval is the gating step to go from step 2 to step 3, if that makes sense.
Okay.
It's just the style of presentation, I think, not a substantial difference. Steve, do you have more to add on that?
Yeah, I think, Murti, that's a good question. And we debated this presentation mechanism when we put the slide together. If you look at the end of the review phase, TMC, if they don't support formation of the new TC, ends the process, and we don't bother tab with a potential discussion if TMC doesn't even recommend support of the new TC. So we look at the end of the previous phase as the kickoff to the switching to the next phase.
This is Kathy. Also, I want to highlight in step 2, we provide a 4-week open comment period to the entirety of tab. One of the factors in whether or not TMC supports formation would be based on the comments that are received from that review period. But I do want to highlight, thank you, Susan. Murti makes a great point. Would be more clear if each first sentence in step 2 and step 3 moved up to the prior one. We can work on this offline to improve the visual to be more clear. Thank you, Murti. Thank you, Susan. Anything further to add? Murti, do you want to provide any comeback? Murti?
No, that's good. Thank you.
All right, thank you. This one is from Charlie. Can a TC form a conference? Will a TC have a bank account? Reserves.
Good question, Charlie. So certainly TCs can both sponsor and co-sponsor conferences, both financially and technically. This is already the case with the existing TC mechanism, by the way. The difference is, as you mentioned or alluded to, reserves is the key to that. That was the Sisyphus picture. The implication of Sisyphus was the current instantiation of TCs, TC 1.0, they can form conferences. If they make money from the conference, that money gets liquidated at the end of the year back to tab. And so as a result of that, the next year they start with a completely clean slate, i.e. the rock rolls back down and they start pushing it up the hill again. And what we're really trying to change through the financial mechanisms is the ability for them to build their own sustainable future rather than be subsidized by other entities. So the goal is that they should be able to show financial performance. They can accrue reserves. And in fact, we've permitted or we've allowed for a certain expenditure of their reserves up to a limit so that they can reinvest in themselves. The idea being, rather than come to tab with a proposal for money, let them use their reserves, let them build and use the reserves. So we're really going after financial sustainability as a baked-in concept from the beginning. Does that answer your question, Charlie? I think he doesn't have microphone, so he's typing. Yeah, so he said thanks.
How about, sorry.
Oh, Murti, go ahead.
Okay, my mic was still on, so I just jumped in. How about publications?
So Murti, thank you for the question. We're not dealing with publications and standards at this time because the implementation of that requires changes of governing documents across IEEE. But we don't want to wait for technical community's improvements to do that. So after this approval, hopefully in November at tab, we intend to address both pubs and standards next year.
If you want more discussion on this, we could talk a little bit philosophically of the importance of publications and how they might interact with TCs, but I think we're not prepared to give details on the governance at this point.
And to
That's
add to the
fine.
strategy too, I mean, we wanted to make sure that we were whole with respect to TMC as well as with TAB.
Maybe as a further comment on publications, in the present state, TCs can actually co-sponsor a publication with a primary sponsor of a society or council. So that's already in place. They can receive resources from it according to an MOU and so on. And that's already possible. And those things can flow to their reserves, can be spendable ops budget and so on. So that's already possible. The thing that's not in place yet is for them to create and manage their own publication. Now, newsletters are a different category, and I think newsletters have a very different bar in terms of forming that. So that's something that they could already do, and many already do that. And it's a way to communicate with their community without making a formalized publication.
Other questions or comments? So I'm not seeing any. We're available after this meeting as well. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, improvements, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact John or me or Kathy or Sinquin or anybody on the ad hoc with your comments, questions, suggestions, improvements, and so forth. We'd love to hear from you. We'd appreciate any ideas that you might have that we haven't addressed. And we want to thank you for participating. John, I see you want to ask about it. Do you want to list the assets? It's easy.
Yeah,
It's
we'd
on the
love to
next
hear more
page.
about that, Steve. We're excited
It's-
about the different kinds of assets.
What are the different kinds of assets that we've been considering when we say the word assets? Oh, why don't you let us know?
Yeah, so you can see a number of different types of assets, and societies and councils do all of these things or many of these things. And these are not strictly products and services, but they add value to the community in various ways. The reason this came up is finance actually suggested we use the term products and services rather than assets. And we wanted to push back and be more global. Now, there's probably some future governance language that will be more precise about these topics, but it's not in place yet. When that comes out, obviously we'll conform like the rest of TAB. We'll shift to whatever new language is recommended. But for the moment, we did want to highlight that we do have assets that may not be strictly speaking products and services, although some of these obviously are. But you can imagine some of them are strictly community benefits. Even things like a website are essentially an asset. You have a lot of information on the website. You've invested a lot in that. Subscriber lists are tangible assets. And so you can imagine one of the use cases or the end states for TCs might be acquisition by another body. Just like large companies often spin out new ideas or ideas that are outside of their core as a startup, but later on effectively acquire and merge that back into the company when they become more mature. Because they don't want to encumber it with all of the corporate bureaucracy, all of the corporate mechanisms. They want it to be able to move fast. But once it becomes mature, they bring it back in. So you can imagine many of these assets would come with that if it was an acquisition and was going to be brought back into a larger entity. So we really wanted to highlight these assets and the importance of the value that these deliver beyond just products and services.
Thanks, John. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions or comments. Let me thank again the ad hoc for all their work that you've seen here. I also want to thank in particular TAB Governance for partnering with us and making this process work smoothly and interfacing with IEEE governance, legal and finance to help us move this along. Thanks to all of you for participating in the webinar. And I hope to see you and hear from you going forward at the TAB meeting in November. And again, let us know if you have any questions or comments before that. And thanks to the staff for putting this webinar together.
And lastly, thanks to Steve for leading this. It was a big lift and a lot of different complexities. And Thanks to all of you. I hope we're making all of you become stakeholders behind this, recognizing this as a new mechanism to make IEEE more agile and more capable at handling emerging areas and cross-cutting areas. So hopefully we're making stakeholders of all of you.
And thank you, John.